Learning Bird brings you Miss O'Brien's Learning Bites. Today we're going to look at the customs and beliefs of the First Nations people in Canada. Everybody knows that the current population of Canada is composed of an array of people with many different backgrounds from countries all over the world. But what we don't usually think of are the people who were here at least 12,000 years before the first settlers arrived. These people are known as the First Nations, or the Indigenous peoples of Canada. Of course, these people went by a different, much more offensive title for hundreds of years: Indians. This misnomer is due to the fact that when many of the earlier explorers reached North America, they thought that they had found India. When the explorers returned or rode home to Europe, they referred to the people that they had encountered as Indians. To this day, First Nations people still battle with the overuse of this ignorant title. Some sports teams still use or have just recently changed their names to something other than the Indians. How would you like to be called by a name that isn't yours? Engelbert? Before these clueless Europeans discovered Canada, there were over 600 unique First Nations tribes ranging from the Haida in the west, the Ottawa in the south, the Mi'kmaq along the Atlantic Ocean, and the Inuit in the north. Over the past 100 years, fundamental changes in lifestyle and the governance of Canada by people unsympathetic to the First Nations plight have contributed to the unraveling of 12,000 years of history. Today, the amount of clans has been drastically diminished for a number of complex reasons, the most disturbing of which being the Canadian government's decision to forcibly remove thousands of children from their parents and place them into provincially run residential schools. This resulted in the physical and cultural annihilation of a generation of children to whom precious knowledge was to be transferred. Although each individual First Nations band has differing mythologies and belief systems, some similarities between them can be drawn. First of all, the First Nations were very resourceful. Before the discovery of Canada, the native people were completely unknown to the industrialized nations in other parts of the world, which meant that they had no one to trade with but themselves. So everything that they wore, ate, and lived in had to come from their direct environment. They worked together to fish, forage, and hunt in the oceans, lakes, rivers, fields, and forests of Canada. The impressive amount of dazzling and intricate tools and items that they were able to make on their own was mostly due to their careful usage of every part of every animal that they slayed. The Indigenous peoples believed that animals were sacrificial gifts from nature, and that each one possessed both a personality and a soul that could not move into the spiritual realm unless the physical body was honored. This is difficult for us to imagine today because we are so accustomed to guiltlessly throwing things away. Think about the hamburger you ate the other night. It came from the grocery store, perfectly ground, wrapped in a nice shiny package. But where did the rest of the cow go? The First Nations people would have used the skin to make leather, the hooves to make glue, the horns for ceremonial practices, and would even have used the manure for fuel. Today's major religions are typically patriarchal, which means that the central figure that is worshipped is a man, but the First Nations worshipped the Creator, or the Great Spirit, which in most cases did not have a gender. Non-Indigenous people today might refer to this Great Spirit as nature. The first peoples believed that Mother Earth gave birth to the Great Spirit and to all of the other spirits dwelling in the smallest ant to the largest tree. The Great Spirit is seen to be in control of all things, and certain signs, like a drought or an abundance of fish, would signify to the First Nations that the Great Spirit was either angry or happy. To ensure that the Great Spirit was pleased, First Nations regularly dressed up in their fanciest garments and joined in ceremonies that often involved music, intense drum beating sessions, and singing to show their undying respect for the world around them. These ceremonies were called powwows, and they are still held today. The First Nations also put a great deal of importance into the shape and symbolic meaning of the circle. The circle represented an unending cycle and symbolized the constant presence of the Great Spirit. The bird's nest, the swirling of the wind, the seasons, the moon, and the sun were all circular. At this point, no one had discovered that the planet too was spherical. Most Europeans actually believed that the Earth was a cube, and if you sailed too far in the wrong direction, you would fall off the planet. This shows that the First Nations had an idea of the universe that was intuitive and turned out to make much more sense than the ideas of the people who claimed to be superior to them. This circle concept extended to the First Nations' belief of life and death. For them, death was a physical end to the body, but a new beginning of the unending spirit. It is believed in various mythologies that the spirits of the dead rejoined nature, where they thrived and were able to interact with the living through subtle signs like changes in the weather and atypical animal behavior. Some belief systems claim that certain powerful spirits, such as those possessed by shaman or wise elders, could be reincarnated or born again in the bodies of babies or in prominent animals like eagles, orca whales, grizzly bears, or wild horses, to name a few. The First Nations also believed that an animal spirit could be reborn in a human and would show itself through certain significant behaviors. This transference of spirit can be seen in the drums, artwork, carvings, and totems of the indigenous people, which attempt to explain with images these intricate belief systems. Finally, the perceived presence of animal spirits in First Nations people has a lot to do with how they are named. You might have even heard of some certain famous people with names like Sitting Bull, Running Bear, or Crazy Horse. They were all named after the spirits that seemed alive in them when they were children. With this video, I have hardly grazed the surface of all there is to know about the rich histories of the First Nations bands. But I encourage you to investigate on your own, because a Canada that exists without recognizing the multifaceted customs, traditions, lore, and suffering of our Indigenous peoples is not Canada at all. Miss O'Brien's Learning Bites has been a Learning Bird production. Check out the library of videos that Learning Bird has to offer at www.learningbird.com.